I'll be doing South Carolina. So first, I'll talk a little bit about the head coach, and then I'll talk some about the roster, and then I'll go through their schedule game by game and give you a predicted winner and loser for each game. So head coach Shane Beamer enters his fourth season as the head coach of South Carolina. So his first 2 years were successful for being at South Carolina. So his first season they went 7-6, and I know that's not a great record, but that year South Carolina was expected to miss a bowl game, so it was a better year than expected. And then the second year they improved to 8-5, and then the third year they had some hype going into the season with the 8-win season they just had, and getting at quarterback Spencer Rattler back, but they disappointed and had a 5-7 season. So his overall record at South Carolina is 20-18, and I have a feeling that they might keep him another year, even if he struggles again this year, which I think South Carolina is going to struggle again this year. But if they do, then he'll be in big danger in 2025 of getting fired. It'll be a do well or get fired situation for him. In recruiting, he's been doing pretty well for being at South Carolina. So in 2022, South Carolina had the 24th ranked recruiting class, and then in 2023, they had the 16th ranked recruiting class. And then in 2024, they had the 22nd ranked recruiting class. So if you're consistently recruiting in the top 25 at South Carolina. That's pretty good. Now, starting on the offensive side of the roster at quarterback, they've had good numbers these past two seasons with Spencer Rattler at quarterback. Last year, they averaged 278 passing yards a game, which ranked 23rd in the country, and he had 2 years of over 3,000 passing yards. And the passing yards are going to be down this year, losing Rattler. So the expected starter this year is Lenoris Sellers. He was Rattler's backup last year, and he barely played. He only played in 3 games, and he's only a three-star recruit. So he's only thrown 4 passes in college. Now he did complete all of them, and 2 of those were touchdown passes. And what he can give South Carolina, I think that Spencer Rattler couldn't give them much of is the ability to run around. He's a talented runner. He only ran 5 times last year, but he had 51 yards on those 5 runs, including a 36-yard touchdown run. So at wide receiver, they lose Xavier Liggett, who was their best receiver last year, one of the SEC's best receivers. He was a really good player, and he ended up going first round in the draft. I don't see a real replacement for him, but they did add in a couple of group of 5 transfer wide receivers. So they add in Jared Brown from Coastal Carolina, who had last season 740 yards on 58 catches and 4 touchdowns, averaging 12.8 a catch. And They added in Gage Larvada, who had in 10 games 42 catches for 679 and 6 touchdowns, averaging 16.2 a catch. And At running back, they bring in Rocket Sanders from Arkansas, who, when he's healthy, is one of the best running backs in the SEC. So he didn't play much last year because of an injury, but in 2022, he had 1,443 yards on 222 carries and 10 touchdowns, averaging 6.5 a carry and had 7 games of over 100 rushing yards that year, including a 232 against Ole Miss. And I'm an Ole Miss fan. I remember that. They also bring in a couple of running back transfers from littler teams. They bring in a FCS transfer, Jawarn Howell, who was really good at the FCS level. He had in 9 games last year, 809 yards on 102 carries and 7 touchdowns, averaging 7.9 a carry. But FCS defenses are a lot different than SEC defenses. And they bring in a transfer from North Texas, Oscar Attaway, who had last year 738 on 123 carries and 6 touchdowns, averaging 6 yards a carry. Even though the group of five is better than FCS, it's still a lot different than SEC. Those are questionable running back transfers, in my opinion. But Rocket Sanders will no doubt be the starting running back. But for anything on South Carolina's offense that I just talked about to even matter, it's going to come down to the offensive line, which has got to play a lot better. They were terrible last year. That was really why they missed a bowl game last year. They returned 4 starters, but last year they gave up 41 sacks, and their offensive line was so bad that they only averaged 2.8 rushing yards per run last year. So on the defensive side, they were okay last year. They gave up on average 25.2 points per game, and at stopping the run, they ranked 65th, giving up 149.4 rushing yards per game. And at stopping the pass, though, they were bad. They ranked 99th, giving up 246.3 a game. So on the defensive line, overall, it's not elite, but they do have their best player on the defensive line coming back, TJ Sanders, who had last year 43 tackles and 4.5 sacks and 9 total pressures and 4 pass breakups. And they bring in a good player from Georgia Tech on the defensive line who had 12 games last year, 54 tackles and 6 sacks and 2 forced fumbles and an interception. His name was Kyle Kennard. And at linebacker, they returned Debo Williams, who is one of the best linebackers in the SEC. He's probably the best player on their defense. He's a really good player. He'll no doubt play in the NFL. He was their leading tackler last season with 113 tackles, and he also had a sack and a fumble recovery and 4 total pressures and 3 pass breakups. And then they bring in a couple of transfer linebackers. They bring in a group of five transfer from Charlotte, Demetrius Knight, who had last season 96 tackles and 1.5 sacks and 3 interceptions and 4 pass breakups. And they bring in a transfer from Pittsburgh, uh, Bengali Kamara, who had in 10 games last year 54 tackles and 2 sacks and 1 pass breakup and 5 total pressures. I mean, 15 total pressures last season. So they're pretty good at linebacker. Uh, and then in the secondary, the safety unit is really good, one of the best in the SEC. And this is the biggest strength of South Carolina's team is the safeties. So they return 3 really good safeties. They return DQ Smith, who had last season 73 tackles and 2 pass breakups and an interception and a forced fumble and a fumble recovery. And Nick Emanwori, who has in 23 games these past 2 years combined, 156 tackles, and 9 pass breakups and 2 interceptions and a fumble recovery. And then they returned Jalen Kilger, who had last season 76 tackles and 6 pass breakups and an interception and a forced fumble. But the problem with South Carolina's secondary last year and might be again this year is the cornerback position. They're not very good there, and they need to play much better there if they're going to do better than I think they're going to this year. So on special teams, kicker is questionable. They lose their kicker, but punter looks solid. They return their punter, who's a decent punter. So now, moving on to the predictions, they start the year against Old Dominion. Should be a pretty easy win. A nice way to start the year when you've got a inexperienced quarterback. So then they play their first SEC game of the year on the road at Kentucky. This is going to be a tough one. I think it'll be close, but like I said in the Kentucky video, I think that Kentucky is better at the line of scrimmage than South Carolina is, especially on the offensive line, to where they win this game by probably like a touchdown. So then they play LSU at home. So LSU's new quarterback Garrett Nussmeier is a lot more experienced than South Carolina's new quarterback is. He's played a lot, and he's even played some, not just in garbage time, like Lenore Sellers from South Carolina has. He's just played in garbage time. And he's looked good. Garrett Nussmeier has when he's played. And LSU's got a better group of wide receivers than South Carolina does. And they've got a really good tight end, Mason Taylor. And South Carolina this year doesn't really have a good tight end. At least it doesn't seem like it right now. And LSU's defensive line is not very good. So South Carolina may be able to run some with Rocket Sanders in this game because even though their offensive line is not very good, LSU I don't think can really take advantage of that with their defensive line. So South Carolina will probably score some in this game, and both defenses in the secondary look pretty similar to me. Both secondaries struggled last year, and I like the safeties for LSU too, but I don't like the cornerbacks. But I think Nussmeier can take advantage of South Carolina's weakness at the cornerback position more than Sellers can for South Carolina. And LSU's offensive line is going to be so good this year. I think they'll dominate the South Carolina defensive line and run well in this game. And coaching is a big advantage for LSU with Brian Kelly, one of the best coaches in the country. And LSU's also got some really good linebackers that can help out with stopping the run too and pass. So I think LSU is just too good. But I think that it will be a competitive game. I think South Carolina will probably keep it close most of the game, and then LSU will pull away in the fourth quarter and win by a couple of scores. So then they play Akron. This should be a blowout win. And then they play maybe the toughest three in a row of any team this year. Ole Miss, and then Alabama on the road, and then Oklahoma on the road. And if you've watched my videos for those three teams, you already know I think South Carolina's losing all three of them. So Ole Miss, even if they're not playing at their ceiling in this game. And even though this is at South Carolina, which can be a tough place to play, Ole Miss is just too much better than South Carolina this year to where they're still going to beat them by at least 2 touchdowns, even if that's the case in this game. And Ole Miss is probably going to blow them out. They've got so much offense that even though South Carolina's defense is going to be okay, I think it's still going to give up a lot of points to really good explosive offenses like Ole Miss is going to have, and Ole Miss's defense is going to be really good this year too, especially the defensive line, which will dominate the South Carolina offensive line, and I think shut down South Carolina's offense pretty much. So then on the road at Alabama, this will be a blowout loss, very likely, probably a 20 something point loss. Alabama is going to be so much better than South Carolina everywhere, and especially at the line of scrimmage, they'll dominate them there. They've got so much more talent than South Carolina does. The only part of the team really where Alabama and South Carolina could be similar really is maybe in the secondary, but everywhere else Alabama is way ahead. So then on the road at Oklahoma, so South Carolina may be able to compete some in this game. Oklahoma may not have a very good offensive line either, but Oklahoma's defensive line is going to be really good, and it'll dominate the South Carolina offensive line. Uh, and I think South Carolina won't be able to score much in this game because the Oklahoma's linebackers and secondary are also really good. And Oklahoma's quarterback Jackson Arnold, of course, isn't very experienced, but he's got more talent than Sellers does at South Carolina, and he's got a much better group of wide receivers to throw the football to. And I think Oklahoma will end up winning this one by at least 2 touchdowns. So then Texas A&M at home. So I think that Texas A&M will win this game by probably like 2 touchdowns. Texas A&M is just so much more talented than South Carolina is. A&M's offensive line isn't great either, but their defensive line is so good it'll dominate the South Carolina uh, offensive line, and I don't think South Carolina will score much in this game. A&M's defense is going to be very good. So Texas A&M's at quarterback Connor Wayman is, I think, better than South Carolina's Lenora Sellers is. Wayman is probably at one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC, and Texas A&M has an advantage at wide receiver, and they've got three proven Power Four running backs on their team. So then they play on the road at Vanderbilt. So Vanderbilt is a team that won't be able to take advantage of a weak offensive line for South Carolina because their defensive line is probably going to be even worse. So I think South Carolina will be able to score a lot in this game, and they'll shut down Vanderbilt's offense, which they're not going to have much offense. And I think they'll win this one pretty easily. So then they play Missouri at home. Too much offense for South Carolina to keep up with. South Carolina may score some. Missouri's not going to have a great defense, but South Carolina is going to give up a lot of points to an explosive, great offense like Missouri is going to have. And I think they'll lose this one by a couple of scores. So then Wofford, this will be an easy win, an FCS opponent. Then on the road at Clemson in the season in the rivalry game, I don't think South Carolina's beating Clemson this year. Clemson is not near what they used to be, like I've said many times, but they're still well ahead of South Carolina. So this could be pretty close, though. But I think Clemson will win by at least a touchdown. So my final prediction for South Carolina is 4-8 overall and 1-7 in the conference. So South Carolina's a team that I know I've said is terrible before, but it's really because I'm an SEC fan that I've been saying that, and South Carolina's in the SEC because if you compare them to all of the SEC teams, they're close to the bottom and they do look terrible, which is why their record is likely going to be bad this year. But if they were in a different conference, they would probably be a bowl team. This though is one of the top five toughest schedules in the country. I do think at best case they get to 6-6, and I would be shocked though if they did any worse than 4-8. That will be it with this video, and thanks for watching, and please subscribe, and I'll be back soon.